everyone, and welcome to today's discussion about autonomous vehicles. I'm Lance Inyon, Senior Associate Dean of Communication at the USC Price School of Public Policy. I heard this morning that holiday traffic is supposed to increase by 10% this Labor Day weekend compared to last year. So this is a good time to talk about how autonomous vehicles are going to change our transportation system. I know I drove to the Valley last night from USC, and I only wish I'd been in a self-driving car. Today's discussion is moderated by USC Price Professor Marlon Barnett. He's director of Metrans Transportation Research Center. Metrans is a partnership between USC and Cal State Long Beach. Its mission is to solve transportation problems of large metropolitan areas. You may have noticed, as I did last night, that Los Angeles has some transportation problems. A few housekeeping matters before I turn the call over to Professor Barnett. Audience members are encouraged to submit questions through the Q&A function on your screen. The panelists will do their best to respond to as many questions as possible in our allotted time. However, this webinar does not allow for questions submitted verbally to the panelists. A recording of today's event will be available in about a week on the YouTube channel for the USC Price School. With that, let me turn things over to Professor Barnett. Marlon?
Thank you, Lance. First of all, thank you to the USC Price team that put this together, to Lance Ignon, our communications director, to Gia Acosta, who has been one of the key people making this happen. And so thanks to both of them. Let me introduce our two panelists today. We are pleased to have with us first Adam Lane, who is the City Policy and Government Affairs Manager at Waymo, which is an autonomous driving technology company. Adam oversees Waymo's relationship with local policy and government stakeholders in Los Angeles and other jurisdictions. Prior to joining Waymo, Adam Lane worked as the Vice President of Government Affairs and Programs for the Los Angeles Business Council, which is a progressive business advocacy and research organization, and he oversaw the LA Business Council's government affairs strategy and public policy priorities in several areas, including clean energy, sustainability, and transportation. Adam received a Bachelor of Arts magna cum laude in political science from Cal State Northridge and a master's degree in public policy right here at the USC Price School. So thrilled to have you back with us, Adam. And before we get started, let me also introduce Petros Ioannou. Professor Petros Ioannou has the title of USC University Professor, which is one of the university's highest academic honors. He is an elected member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, and we are thrilled that he is the longtime Metrans Associate Director for Research. Petros's appointment is in the departments of Electrical and Computer Engineering, Aerospace and Mechanical Engineering, and Industrial and Systems Engineering. Petros's academic research stretches back over 4 decades on topics that include autonomous control, systems control, and among several other things, he has been an associate editor of the IEEE Transactions on Automatic Control. And so, Petros, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Let me start by asking first Adam Lane and then Petros Ioannou kind of an introductory question. And so, Adam, if you could tell us about Waymo, just kind of describe what your company does, what you're currently doing.
Yeah, well, thank you, Marlon and Lance and the whole USC Price team. Proud to be an alum back here speaking. So Waymo is an autonomous driving technology company. We have a mission to be the world's most trusted driver. Our goal is really to help reduce traffic injuries and deaths. Last year in the city of Los Angeles, our #1 cause of death was vehicular accidents, even more than gun deaths, which is a very unfortunate truth, and it's something that's pretty common across the US. We started in 2009 as the Google Self-Driving Car Project. We actually split off as our own entity in 2017, but we are still a part of the Alphabet company. They are a major investor of ours. In 2020, we launched the world's first commercially available ride-hailing app that was fully autonomous. So no one sitting in the driver's seat, no one driving the steering wheel. It was a pretty exciting milestone. And subsequently, every year after that, we announced a new market. So we went to San Francisco, then we went to Los Angeles, and then Austin, Texas. We operate a fully electric fleet of Jaguar I-Paces. So the sustainability is a big part of our mission as a company. And also we have hit some amazing milestones that I'll get to in a moment, but we've driven over 20 million miles fully autonomously. We've done over 20 billion in simulation. So we're regularly testing our vehicles in different scenarios to see how they respond and how we can improve. And we've also done testing in 13 states. So even though we're only operating in 4, we are regularly testing in other states to see how we respond to different weather conditions, how we respond to different infrastructure, and all that goes to update our fleet in the markets we're actively operating in. Just for background, if people aren't aware, we are what is considered a level 4 on the SAE scale of autonomy. Level 4 is when no one needs to take over the steering wheel or sit in the driver's seat. You do not need to pay attention to what is actively occurring in the car. When you think about some of the other models that are out there on personal vehicles, those are really level 2s, and there's only one level 3 made in the US by Mercedes that's only available in some select markets. But when you talk about a level 2, that's actually a driver assist system where you have to be paying attention to the road, then you will be asked to take over. So you should be hovering the steering wheel and your feet should be hovering the brakes and the gas. In our car, we never require you to sit in that seat. Actually, we will not start the vehicle if you are sitting in that seat. And if you decide to yank on our steering wheel during the drive, the car will warn you and then pull over. So our car is fully autonomous and does not require you to do any of that. Now to the markets that we're operating in, and Gia, do you mind pulling up the slides, please? We're currently operating in 4 markets, 3 that are commercially available, and 1 that is currently going through employee testing. So as I mentioned, we started in Phoenix. That is our largest market as far as geography. We recently expanded to over 300 square miles, which is really exciting. That's a large territory. We just announced this week that we are offering 24/7 pickup and drop off at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. That is another major milestone for us, and we're likely going to pass 100,000 trips to and from that airport. San Francisco, we got rid of our wait list in June, and I can go into what that wait list means in a bit, but we had over 300,000 sign up for our wait list in San Francisco. So there's a really, really high demand. And then in Los Angeles, we launched commercially in April. We started offering paid rides, and I'll dive deep into this in a second, but finally we announced Austin, Texas as our last market. We're doing employee testing, which is sort of the last phase before we get to public rides. Los Angeles, just 2 weeks ago, we were excited to announce that we were expanding our territory. So we started in sort of a 63 square mile territory in Metro LA is like what we call it, from Santa Monica to downtown. We recently expanded to about 97 square total miles. So we now include communities like Marina del Rey, Playa Vista, Hollywood, Westwood. So that means anywhere in this service territory, you can call a ride, it'll come to you autonomously, and it'll drop you off autonomously. We've had 150,000 people sign up for the wait list in Los Angeles, and we're making our way quickly through that as we see increased demand. So it's an exciting time. We're hitting milestones very quickly. Our most exciting milestone that we recently announced is that we are doing over 100,000 trips weekly throughout our several markets. We hit a big milestone of 50,000 just in May. So 3 months after we hit 50,000, we are now offering 100,000 rides per week. So it's very exciting where we are. We're continuing to grow in a strategic way, being transparent with our community partners and our policymakers, but it's an exciting time for growth at Waymo.
Adam, thank you so much. I want to move a little bit now from kind of operations to research. And Petros, if you could start, you've been involved in technologies and technological innovations that have run the gamut from driver assist all the way up to now autonomous vehicles. If you could describe for the audience the work you've done and both in the past and what you're doing kind of now and looking to the future.
Sure. Well, my work on autonomous vehicles started from the very early 80s through interactions with Ford and General Motors, where the emergence of electronics and computers, they saw an opportunity to copy a lot of technologies that were on aircraft, mainly fly-by-wire and so on. So I work on concepts such as drive-by-wire, steer-by-wire, cruise control, and later on adaptive cruise control in collaboration with Ford that eventually became commercial. And I also work on automated container terminals where all the vehicles were automated in a more controlled environment where safety is not a big of an issue. And I always believe in an evolutionary approach where safety is properly addressed step by step until we get full automation. Full automation is inevitable because that's where technology is heading. As we see, a lot of processes are automated in many different areas. So why not have a fully automated vehicles? And then I also look into, fine, if the vehicles are automated, how will that affect the traffic? Will we get less congestion? That's a more difficult question to answer. And I tend to believe that vehicle automation is not going to do much to congestion unless it leads to a reduction of vehicles, because congestion is not the result of how a vehicle is driven, but more how many vehicles are on the road. Now, I believe the success of automated vehicles will very much depend on safety records. And to assess safety, the way NHTSA and other agencies assess safety is to see how many miles are driven, how many, to use a statistical approach, in other words, to see how many miles are driven, how many accidents, and compare that with human driving. I also do, so safety in our research group is very important. We develop concepts, how guarantee that the vehicle will never position itself in a situation that it cannot handle. Given around it, there are vehicles which are manually driven and you don't know what they're planning to do, and so on. So these are challenging research problems. And another area that I encounter, which is more hands-on about safety, is I do occasional expert witnessing where I examine accidents and so on. And what I see in this trend, even before going into fully automated vehicles, is that initially vehicles were consisting of mechanical, hydraulic, and pneumatic parts. And then electronics came in, and now you have an electronic computer control. The driver presses the gas, but it doesn't really affect the throttle because that input becomes a voltage. It goes into the unit. There are lines of code there that decide how to do the throttle. So initially, the driver was the sensor and actuator of the system with direct control of the acceleration of the vehicle. Now we are putting something between and a lot of lines of code. So, and a lot of these codes are simple logical statements. If this is so, then you do this. If that. And what I am finding out is that people are missing things, they never thought of a certain situation. And that becomes a little bit scary from my side, because now when we go to fully automated vehicles, that becomes far more complex because you have to interpret the environment. And there are so many possibilities that it could be. It's humanly impossible to think about all the situations. And I'm really impressed that Waymo and other companies are able to do all this, to run these vehicles thousands and thousands of miles and be able to cope with these issues. And the other thing, when it comes to, again, to talking to lawyers and so on, if something goes wrong with these automated vehicles, it's very difficult to find out what happened, especially if you have AI involved, neural networks running, and so on. So it's something that I'm very curious to see how it will unfold in the future. So in my research group, the main focus is safety on vehicles, but also the connectivity that will improve mobility, because really, if we look at it, the most frustrating part of a driver is to drive in congestion. The vehicle is not that tiring to drive, in other words. But obviously, when you have congestion, it's better that you are not in front of the wheel and you are sitting back and relaxing because of the congestion. So it's a very complicated, interconnected situation. So if I cannot reduce congestion, I better be in an automated vehicle so I can relax and do other things. But if I want to deal with congestion, the answer is one and only one: find ways to reduce the number of vehicles.
Thank you. And I am keeping track as best as I can in real time. We have a lot of questions coming in, and keep those questions coming. And what we'll try to do is to be sure to save some time at the end to take up questions. I do want to move to the question of safety. And I know that we are getting questions on that. And Petros, thank you for your discussion. Adam, let me ask kind of from a different perspective, thinking about safety, how comfortable should a customer feel getting into a Waymo vehicle?
Yeah, it's a good question. And Petros, thank you for that information. It's very insightful. Very comfortable is how I would put it. I'll say the main reason, the four main causes of car accidents are being distracted. With the increase in cell phone usage, drivers are constantly being distracted, and it's causing more and more accidents. Drinking and driving, which tends to be the #1 cause of vehicular deaths. Our vehicles don't drink. I know that sounds funny, but it is huge to take that factor out of driving. They don't speed. Our cars perfectly follow the speed limit, which I can tell you, if you've been in a Waymo in Los Angeles, at times that can feel pretty funny. And they don't get drowsy. So by taking those four factors out of driving, we are already a safer ride than a human-driven vehicle. Now, we've actually backed that up with research studies that we produced that you can find on the Waymo website. But after we did about 7.1 million miles on public roads, we looked at our research and compared it to human benchmarks and found that we actually decreased injury-causing crashes by 85% and police-reported crashes by 57%. So there's a huge number to take down by 85%. So we are actively creating a safer environment on our roads. And then lastly, I would just say anecdotally, there's nothing like being in the car. There's a little bit of fear before you get into an autonomous vehicle, which is understandable. It's a new experience to see a steering wheel turn itself. But when you're in that car, it might be very exciting or nerve-wracking at first, but very quickly you feel confident in the driving, and you also might get a little bit bored. It is a much safer and sort of calmer experience than you realize. And that's really what we're going for, is to make sure you are feeling safe and comfortable in these vehicles, both via the driving and all the components that we put in for younger individuals who do not feel safe in rideshare at the end of the night, for our accessibility community that has not had proper access to rideshare, has had difficulties in the past, providing equity and access to communities that have had horrible experiences with rideshare drivers not wanting to pick up in their community. So there is safety both in our driving and also safety and accessibility for our passengers.
Let me pick up one thread that I'm seeing coming through some of the questions, which is, and I want to ask this first to Adam and then to Petros, which is, how does the autonomous vehicle technology try to resolve difficult safety conflicts? Conflicts where, for example, there may have to even be a choice made between injuring a pedestrian or injuring the occupants in the car. By the way, I want to acknowledge that I'm not convinced that we perfectly know how humans handle these difficult conflicts, but it is a question. And so, Adam, what is Waymo's approach to this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a couple ways. I mentioned that we've done 20 billion in simulation, so that is a lot of miles. We are constantly running different scenarios. The second part is the real world experience. The more miles that we drive on a road, the more experience we get, the more scenarios we run into. And hopefully we don't run into them. If we do, we can learn from that experience and improve whether it was an issue on our side or just something we happen to experience. Or if we have a close encounter, we're able to improve that as well. What I'll also say is the technology is sophisticated to a point where we're able to distinguish what sort of object is in front of you. We can distinguish whether an officer is wearing a uniform, for example. So the distinctions and the ability of the technology to sort of differentiate objects and make tough decisions is much more along and sophisticated than I think people realize. So those learnings together combined with the technology and constant improvements and enhancements allow us to make safe decisions and improve upon them when we feel like we're not comfortable with how we responded.
Thank you. Thank you. Petros, let me ask you the same question. And I know you've done research on approaches that could give, provably safe, algorithms. What is the research able to tell us about, how to resolve issues of, for example, if the life of a pedestrian were to be put at risk or the life of the occupants and there would be no alternative, so to speak?
Well, this is something that came up in academic circles, and I've heard some, I forgot which auto company made a statement about that, is that there is possibility of the vehicle autopilot, because in a Navy is really an autopilot, is to protect the occupants. That's the main responsibility. So it's not going to decide that I have one occupant in my vehicle, and there is a risk to hit 5 people on the curb. So I choose to kill 1 person versus 5. So that decision is we want to protect the occupant. That's one thing. The other thing so this, which makes sense in some sense. Otherwise, people will be scared to use these vehicles, because there will be situations where, if there are situations and they are not priority number 1 when it comes to their lives, they're not going to feel as comfortable. The other thing I want to say, we know for sure that there are no sensors who can emulate human eyes 100%. So mistakes will be made. There will be faults. There will be misses. Hopefully very, very low. The issue that I have in mind, based on the statistics that Daman mentioned, is that some of these statistics are a little bit misleading, and it has to do with probability versus conditional probability. In other words, saying that this technology will reduce the number of accidents by so much %, most people would be interested. And in their minds, that's how we work, even though they don't know probability, is what is the probability that I will get into an accident, given that I'm a careful driver and I don't drink and drive and I don't do drugs. So that gives me the sense of control. But when I go into a vehicle that is driven by someone else or a computer, really the safety, I pass the safety to someone else. And a lot of people may not like to give up this control. Other people will. And we have the same thing. So the perception becomes very important here. And we have the aircraft, for example, which is proven statistically to be much safer than a vehicle. Yet, there are many vehicles who are afraid of the plane, but they're not afraid of the car. And you are not going to find anything reverse. In other words, people are afraid of the car, but they're okay with the plane. I mean, that number is very small. So I think the perception becomes very important. And I think, and I hope not, if there is a major accident involving those AVs, it's going to shake everything. And I hope not. So the perception becomes very important. People are not going to buy probabilities. They will be influenced by saying, hey, this is much safer than human driving. That helps to know, but is not going to convince people as much when it comes to control and safety and things like that. It's their perception. It's how they perceive safety. Younger people are more open to it. Other people may not be. I will not be. I'm not open to give up control, for example. That's the way my brain works.
Well, good. Thank you. And wait, Adam, did you have something that you wanted to add to that, or?
I was just going to offer Petros a ride in the car. I think you're completely right. That is something.
I already rode in an automated car because we designed some back in the early 90s, and we drove them on I-15 and test tracks. And I know it's a very comfortable drive. And you're absolutely right. The human brain initially is tense, but as you keep going, it relaxes. The subconscious gets used to it, that this is not threatening, and they relax and they enjoy it. It usually takes 25 to 45 minutes. And after that, after 45 minutes, fear and nervousness goes down to zero completely. I read about it, so I was interested in this human reaction times and perceptions. So I'm sure it's a very comfortable drive, and a lot of people love it, really.
Very good. Thank you. What I want to do is to run through the next two topics. And one, I want to talk about the regulatory environment. And then after that, we've been getting a lot of questions about traffic congestion. And so let's cue that up as a topic after that. But the regulatory environment, the technology for the autonomous driving vehicles is interesting because it does a lot of on-road learning. I mean, in fact, I'm going to conjecture that one could make an argument that, putting these vehicles into learning environments is necessary for technological improvement. On the flip side, of course, you'd hope that there's some oversight body that's making sure that the vehicles are on the road when they're safe, and in a way that will fit in with the values of the local governments. So, Adam, let me start with you. Waymo is operating in different states. What are you seeing in terms of the regulatory environment of those different states? And are there things that you are seeing that, are big positives and things that maybe are not positives?
Yeah, so right now we are in 4 markets across 3 states. We regularly test in other states, as I mentioned earlier. We have worked for many years to develop strong and transparent relationships with our regulators, and we meet all of our regulations, whether they're data or safety reporting requirements. So I'll say that. What I'll also say is that each state very much differs in their framework. For example, California in 2012 enacted the first legislation in the country that actually authorized AVs in the state, which was pretty exciting. But we didn't deploy in San Francisco until 2022. So it's nearly 10 years later. We require approval from 2 different state agencies. That's the DMV and the CPUC. And we have multiple steps in the permit application. In Arizona, where we operate in the Phoenix market, AVs were essentially authorized through executive order, and then it was codified through legislation. And then in Texas, the law basically treats AVs like a human driver. You have to register your vehicles, you have to have a certain level of insurance, and then you need to follow traffic laws. So I'll let you sort of draw your conclusions about which regulation is easier to work with, but it's obviously still important to have regulation that is flexible and that is allowed to respond as we see more AVs on the road and learn more from the experience and how we share the roads with other users. We work with an industry association called AVIA, the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association, and we've passed model legislation in almost 24 states across the US that we find is a balance between regulation that allows us to be transparent and safe and a good partner, but then also doesn't hinder our deployments into those states. And then what I'll say is a North Star for us would be a national regulatory framework. So that way we would be able to deploy in states without having to, meet new models in every single state. But that would also be simplified and would streamline getting AVs onto the road and start to create a safer environment.
Thank you. Thank you. Petros, so right now, the regulatory environment is basically state to state. What are the things that you would recommend that regulators should be alert to as they're thinking about, regulating?
I think that there's a lot of pressure, mainly economic, but also social, that Adam mentioned, accessibility to underrepresented groups and so on. So they allow that, but I think they need to do more than that, especially when it comes to safety. They should put things on the infrastructure in a way that the vehicle doesn't really have to do a lot of learning to identify, is that a stop sign, is this or is this that. They could help by adding maybe passive sensors or something that the automated vehicle will automatically sense. It might not be visible to a human, but the vehicle automatically senses that this is a stop sign, this is that, and so on. A lot of different things, because you can fool cameras, you can fool, some kids at Berkeley did it with a stop sign by putting pieces of tape and so on. So I think the infrastructure should assist this technology to make it safer by helping to have an environment that it becomes closer to a control environment than an environment where everything is completely unknown or partially unknown, at least. Because one thing, that automation in a control environment works with almost no faults. And we have the automated terminals, we have these automated shuttles, we have a lot of examples of that. And so I think that would be one direction that the infrastructure can really help without a big investment. And I think they might have to do it at one point as the number of these vehicles increases.
Thank you. And that's a really helpful observation. I sometimes tell people when I go from terminal to terminal at airports for decades, I've been riding in driverless vehicles. And I have a suspicion a lot of people don't think of it that way, but that's a highly controlled environment. So,
yeah. And Marlon, one thing I was just going to add to what Petros mentioned about using cameras only. Waymo actually uses a series of technology on our cars. So we use cameras, LiDAR, and radar. 29 cameras on the car might seem excessive, but we like redundancy. We have 5 LiDAR and 6 radar. So we actually do use a combination of technologies that allow us to create essentially an enhanced map around the vehicle to identify what is the trajectory of objects. And then we're able to take in all that information. And one of the coolest things about the car is it can see essentially 3 football fields in length from our spinning LiDAR on top, which is the most obvious piece of technology. But other companies have tried to do just cameras, and I would agree with Petros, and it's not the most effective way because it does sort of miss gaps in the technology. So we have always taken the safer approach of making sure we have all the technology and the software on board to catch as many objects as possible.
Thank you. Let me start, and Adam, I'm going to pitch this next question to you. And I'm going to phrase it this way. What about traffic congestion? Mm-hmm. And we've been getting a lot of questions submitted that touch on that. Some of them asking, what is Waymo's approach? Some of them pointing out that there are studies that project that, autonomous vehicles would be congestion increasing. So if you could kind of respond to that whole kind of, set of questions about traffic congestion.
Yeah, I don't think the sample size is big enough yet to see how we do or do not impact congestion. What I will say for Waymo specifically versus the AV industry as a whole, we are operating ride hailing we are not in personal car use right now. So I think it is a goal for us that because we're operating this fleet of safe EV vehicles, that people maybe don't need to have a car per person in their household, or maybe they don't need to have a car at all. They could take rideshare, or we also want to fill transit gaps. So we are in no way in opposition to public transportation. Actually, we think the technology can serve as a good first mile, last mile solution. So I think by providing a ride hailing service and filling transit gaps, the hope is that we can reduce some of that personal car ownership, to Petros's earlier point. But as it relates to the driving, I think, if you made an assumption that 100% of the vehicles on the road were autonomous, you probably see some increase in efficiency and a reduction in congestion. But that is sort of a far future to imagine that, and there's just not the sample size out there.
And that's very helpful. Let me add that if we did have a world with 100% of the vehicles being autonomous, the other thing we'd probably see is that people may choose to drive more and longer because it's simply less annoying of an experience. And I know that you're focused on a segment of the market where you are very focused on things that have congestion reduction. And then I think there's the kind of broader industry question. Petros, you touched on this earlier a little bit.
So it is not really vehicle ownership, but it's vehicle miles driven that will affect congestion. So if I think if many people may choose not to own a vehicle if they have something that is readily available with your in an app, so on, they call it, it comes, and they use it. So that would be attractive. But my feeling is that driving is driven by demand. People want to go from point A to point B, and this is, and whether they do it with their own vehicle or whether they do it with an Uber or with Waymo, is not going to have any influence on congestion, which is getting worse because people want to travel more often than before. That's what really creates congestion. My hope with these technologies is that with vehicle automation, if they get into buses and shuttles, for example, I live in Palos Verdes, and the use of my vehicle is a must because I cannot go anywhere. But imagine if there was an automated vehicle, an automated bus that is frequent and go from here all the way to USC or to downtown and so on. And if you cut down, if you reduce the driver, if you don't have drivers, you reduce the cost because you have all these other gadgets that you added up, all these cameras which are expensive, the LiDAR especially. But I'm thinking that if it goes into the buses and these automated shuttles, and remove people from and reduce the number of vehicles on the road, that will help. That's my only hope, that if we go in that direction. If this technology is proven, I'm sure it's going to get into automated shuttles that we use at the airports and so on, and maybe have them run many hours, 20 hours a day, so people can go anytime. It may become very useful.
Thank you both. I want to ever so briefly add something, because I think that one thing that's kind of, I think, a common theme between Adam, what you're saying, and Petros, what you're saying, is that part of the congestion impact has to do with this combination of how the industry would evolve and how that is enabled and shaped by what policymakers and planners do. And so Adam, Waymo's position right now, looking at ride hailing, is very clear that there's a particular market. But if you could really, I'm a professor of urban planning. I want to bring in the urban planning that what cities are doing in terms of trying to channel the technology towards mass transit, towards shared rides, could lead to one kind of future. Or if cities were to take an approach saying, that we're going to support a world where autonomous vehicle technology is a single occupant market maybe predominantly owned, that would lead to a different kind of world. And so let me put in a plug for the importance of urban planning, if I might. And so let me take us to a different question. One question that came up is, what about cyber attacks? And Petros, let me start with you and then go to Adam. And the concern was just, how do you think about cyber attacks in this realm?
Well, everything is possible. I mean, people have been putting those cones on the on the trunk of the vehicle and confusing the automated vehicle up in San Francisco. Another issue, non-technical issue, is which Adam can answer, is what do you do if people throw trash inside the vehicle? Who is going to clean it? And I know in China, they have this, they are progressive, very advanced. They have these automated vehicles that they go into this facility, that the doors open, they use robots, they open the doors and there is robotic arms that they clean the vehicle and move it around. So there are a lot of technical issues that need to be addressed as these automated vehicles get adopted by a bigger part of the population. Who monitors that they are not going to damage the vehicle, they're not going to put trash and stains and so on. So the next person who gets it will not shy away. And that's even before going to the cyber attack, which I believe that the people are smart enough to address it. I think I have more confidence in that part than in the part of people trashing it and damaging it and so on.
Yeah, Adam, let me kick both those questions to you then. Kind of, cyber attack and kind of other more, old-fashioned forms of, I think messing with the system.
Yeah. Look, if someone puts a cone on my car while I'm driving, I would also stop. So I think that is a learning experience for Waymo. And actually, when you sit in the car, on your screen, not only can you see when the car sees a stop sign, when it sees a red light, it shows you pedestrians, it shows you pets on the sidewalk, a skateboarder, a bicyclist, but we actually highlight cones in our vehicles. So look, I think there are times where we need to separate where the technology is lacking and where human behavior is not where it should be. And I think at the core of autonomous vehicles is human driving behavior is not where it should be. And frankly, humans putting cones on a car is not common behavior. But there's a problem that comes up. These are really random issues we talked about that we look to address and have. When it comes to cleaning the inside of a car, we have 2 cameras in the vehicle. They are not live monitored. They're specifically there for after the ride. We check inside, see not only did you leave trash, but maybe you left your bag. Maybe you left your laptop case. We can actually reach out to our rider, let them know that we're going to bring the car back, or we'll take it to our depot and provide them with a location or pick it up. So we are implementing a lot of those things. And that's why when you get in a Waymo, that car is always very clean, very taken care of. And we make sure that those things are all thought of. When it comes to cybersecurity, there's 2 things I'd mention. We have a robust safety framework that not only has to do with how the car drives, but has to do with cybersecurity and how we respond to incidents. But also all of our compute power is actually in our vehicle. So in the back of our cars, our compute power is on board. And it's a combination of obviously our perception teams and AI that operates the vehicle. We don't use Wi-Fi. We utilize cell service to talk with our roadside assistants. If that cell service at any point goes down, our vehicles can actually totally drive themselves and complete your ride. So we have put in mechanisms that would prevent any sort of failure from occurring on the car if we were to lose a signal, for example. So yeah, that was what I would say to that, Marlon.
Thank you. Let me bring up something, Adam, that you touched on. The Waymo fleet, as I understand it, is exclusively battery electric.
Yep.
What does that mean in terms of charging infrastructure?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we currently operate a fully 100% Jaguar I-Pace fleet. We recently put out some renderings of our newer model that'll probably hit the roads in a couple of years, but we're actively testing, which will also be electric. We operate with L3 fast chargers. So that requires us to have private fleet charging because, of course, you don't want Waymos on your road blocking all of your public charging. Because of that, we need to secure private fleet charging before we can expand in market. So it is one of the limiting barriers when we enter market. If you look at Los Angeles, for example, even though we're operating in 97 square miles, we do have approval to go much further actually from the state. But we operate incrementally to make sure that we like how our safety performance is, to make sure that we are informing our policy stakeholders and training our first responders, but then also because we need to make sure we have distributed EV charging across the region. If you were to concentrate it all in one area, the demand on the utility grid would be excessive, and I'm sure our utility partners would hate us. But also it's to keep down wait times. So when our vehicles get to a certain battery percentage, they actually drive themselves back to our charging depot. We plug them in, charge them up, and then they head back out for their hails. So the more distributed charging we can have across the city, the more efficient our rides will be and the lower the wait times for our users.
Thank you. Thank you. And we are a little between, 10 and 15 minutes left. And so I want to kind of turn us to what may be a final topic. And I've been trying to weave in questions as I've been able to. And the final topic will be, what does the future look like? And Petros, let me start with you. Petros, are we going to see a world someday where nobody drives?
I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is because the car, to many people, is not just a transportation means to go from point A to point B. They treat the car like a home, like a pet, like people love their cars. There are also people who like the thrill of driving. So a lot of people would like to have the freedom and control. That's why we have sports cars. That's why our cars are not all the same. If it were just for transportation, all the cars would have been exactly the same. But you get the sports cars that are very comfortable, but they give you the thrill of driving. And people like that. So I don't think everything is going to be replaced. But I think as these AVs prove themselves to be safe, to be convenient, and if the cost is very competitive compared to other options of mobility, I think they will be very successful, and we may have a situation where you see most of the vehicles be automated vehicles.
So to kind of summarize, you see a world where we could have a very high fraction of vehicles be automated vehicles, and then there may be some combination of almost what you would call hobbyists, or in the movies, in the world where they have the autonomous vehicles, someone gets in a car and turns off the vehicle and drives it themselves, and everyone looks at them. Why are you doing that? So something like that. Where mostly, but Petros, when do you think it would be? Well, what point in the future would we get to?
My feeling, it all depends on safety records. And really, if they're proven to be safe, and people bring up the example of elevators, for example. When they first came up, a lot of people were scared. People start using them. Now it's part of common life. Nobody talks about elevators anymore. Mm-hmm. Will there be something similar? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, a lot of these sensors that are on the vehicles are also susceptible to weather conditions, to environmental effects. Adam mentioned too many cameras, but what if it's foggy and the cameras don't operate? Do we have a good, will the LiDAR be able to, the LiDAR is also optical. Will the radar be sufficient? And all these things, I mean, in California, it's easy because we don't have these weather conditions. But in other places, it's snowing, and usually are cases that you would prefer to have an automated vehicle because it's very dangerous and stressful to drive. So it all is, I mean, I trust the technology, and I think people will figure it out one way or another. And automation is like one-way road. The question is when. That's what I see. The other thing I see is that I envision at one point, we may not even have traffic lights and signs and things like that. Everything is going to be virtual. If all the vehicles are fully connected, like we are connected now with Google Maps, for example. So you want to go somewhere, you connect with Google Maps and it guides you and so on. So imagine if you have this virtual system that it guides you how to go through an intersection. It brings a light in the vehicle, a green light, and say go or stop and so on. And talking to the Department of Transportation, they're very excited about this thing because simply they don't have money to fix the roads. How could they put expensive sensors on intersections and maintain traffic lights and so on? So I see that trend of going also virtual on the infrastructure level, which will affect mobility and congestion and traffic and so on. So I think these are directions that we are going, and they are inevitable. The question that I don't think anyone can answer precisely is when is it going to happen? And we see, let's say, 20% of the vehicles be AV. In the past, we used to have estimates. Back when I started with these automated highway systems, they were saying 50 years. Almost half of them are gone, and that idea was disappeared. So it's really unknown. But I think my feeling, it depends very much on safety. That's my feeling. And this is something to be seen over the years.
Thank you. And Adam, to your mind, what does the future look like? And maybe not just for the world, but also for Waymo.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with Waymo. I think Petros mentioned sort of advancements in the technology to handle winter or different sort of weather conditions. We're seeing really great advancements in technology, different ways to design the vehicle to allow sensors to be more effective, advancements in fiber optics, advancements in AI. I think there's a whole bunch of combinations of factors of technology and software that will allow the technology to very quickly adapt to new and then worsening conditions. Most technologies are not linear. They tend to grow in a very dramatic fashion. The adoption rate is slow, and then they really are exponential in their growth. So I would say for Waymo, ride-hailing is the focus. But we are an autonomous driving technology company. We are not an OEM. We're not a car company. So there is a ton of applications that the technology could eventually serve. And I think TBD when we'll see that, but it depends not only on technology, but regulation, adoption rates, and then usage rates as well, and the ability to keep the cost down. Overall in the market, I would agree with Petros. I think you're probably not going to see just completely getting rid of manually driven personal vehicles. I think people do have an attachment to their personal vehicles. I think you'll see a combination of whether it's rideshare or autonomous public transportation. Cities have very necessary goals. To your point, Marlon, about urban planning, I think it is important to get people out of cars in general and get them into active transportation or public transportation. The market is more than big enough with those goals in place for Waymo to serve as a ride-hailing app. So we are in favor of these targets. We are in no way would oppose any sort of increase in public transportation usage. But there is also, I would caveat that there is a huge amount of youth now that don't drive right when they become of the age to get a license. There are a lot of youth and younger people and people in general, our senior population who can no longer drive, that do like the idea of not paying for the high cost of a car in a market where everything is very expensive. They don't want to deal with the hassle and danger of driving. They believe in more dense, urban, walkable cities. So I think there is a combination that the technology adoption will go up. Some people will still want their cars, but there actually is a shift in attitudes that we see coming up from the younger generations.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll tell you what, in the interest of keeping us on time, I'm going to ask for kind of your key, just kind of key most important point or observation. And so, Petros, let me start with you. If there's one thought to kind of leave our audience with, what would you say that thought would be in terms of autonomous vehicles?
I think it is really very exciting what Waymo and Cruise and other companies are doing. I think that safety is and will remain the main issue in automotive. It was always the issue, by the way, not because of AVs. Yesterday I was at Michigan, and I met a lot of Ford people and so on, and we discussed safety, and really the culture about safety has changed, and there are concerns. So I hope that safety is given the appropriate attention so that these ideas and the benefits of AVs that we all like materialize. Because if safety is compromised for whatever reason, it might put this whole trend into danger. Because people will wake up and say, no, these are killing vehicles and so on. And they might put pressure to slow the whole thing up. And we've seen examples with Uber accident and so on, where the city came in and say no more, and then they restarted it again and so on. I think safety is important and should be given attention. And I think the trend is going to continue as it is. We see more automation, not just in vehicles, but in other areas. And I think there's a big part of the population that will welcome this kind of technology and use it for the reasons that Aman mentioned and I mentioned and so on. And the other consideration is cost. I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be cost. Assuming everything else is resolved, it's a cost. How much does it cost me to use this versus owning my own car, having my own car, and so on? So I'm very optimistic that eventually it's going to work. I just don't know when.
Thank you. Thank you. And Adam, what is your kind of closing observation?
Yeah, I'll piggyback a bit off what Petro said. I think it's important for the audience to take away that safety is the number one goal of what we are doing. As I mentioned, whether it's our driving behavior, how we're protecting people in the car, and how we are protecting people outside of the car. But then also that it's an exciting time, and the industry is at a point where you are able to distinguish between AV companies. Too much of the conversation has been when one incident happens with one company, it's a reflection of the whole industry. And we're at a point where that is no longer true. I would encourage people who are in the Los Angeles market or San Francisco or Phoenix to sign up to get in a car. In Phoenix and San Francisco, literally today, you could download the app and get in a car. In Los Angeles, you can sign up for the wait list and get off of it hopefully pretty soon. But there is no experience like actually being in the vehicle. And I think it's very important for people to be able to change their perception about what an AV is, because too often, as Petros mentioned before, one incident with an autonomous vehicle gets highlighted way more than any incident you'll see with a human-driven car. Most of you can open your local news today, and there will be a car accident, a high-speed chase, a drunk driving accident. But if we have some very small accident or someone else in our industry, it's national news, when the fact is that we are actively reducing and making our roads safer. So I would say try the car for yourself before you decide whether you like AVs or not, because it is a pretty revolutionary experience to sit in that car.
Thank you so much. And to Professor Petrosiano, to Adam Lane, thank you for joining us. And to everyone in the audience, thank you. I was going to say we can't do it without an audience. Technically, we could, but it would be so much less fulfilling. So Lance, let me hand this back off to you and the Price team.
Thank you, Marlon, and thank you to both our panelists. This was a very interesting discussion. Adam, I've already got downloaded your Waymo app. And thank you to all your guests for showing up. We'll see you at the next Price Presents.